The Janowska forced labor camp that operated in Lviv between 1941 and 1944 belongs to the little-known or almost forgotten Nazi camps in occupied Europe during World War II. Its history still remains a white spot in the history of Lviv and the Holocaust in Ukraine. In the context of Nazi genocidal policies in Eastern Europe, the Janowska camp easily pales into insignificance against the backdrop of other notoriously known death camps on the territory of today's Poland, like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Sobibor, Treblinka, Chełmno, Majdanek, and Belzec, which became the real tragic symbols of the Shoah in the collective memory of Europe. There are scarce publications about the history of the camp, which were represented mainly by the works of Jakub Honigsman, Tatiana Pastushenko, Jana Koba, and Andrei Boyanovsky in Ukrainian historiography, Thomas Zanküller, Dieter Pohl in German historiography, Eliyahu Yones in Israeli historiography, and Whitman Bourne, David Allen Rich in American historiography. At the same time, memorialization and commemoration of the Janowska camp as a mass killing site has only started. In my presentation, I will give you a general overview of the history of the camp, its main functions and stages, and will also present you the current state of commemoration of the Janowska camp in Lviv and in Western Ukraine. Over the entire period of its operation, about 160 prisoners had passed through the camp. Despite its multinational composition, the camp was foremost a Jewish camp and was an integral part of the Holocaust infrastructure in the Galicia district. The share of non-Jews, Gentiles, first of all, Ukrainians and Poles, did not exceed 10%. As of July 1943, we know that the camp had 7,119 Jews and 225 non-Jews among its inmates. All prisoners were made to wear metal identification numbers and triangular badges on their clothes. This color marked the ethnic origin of the inmates: yellow for Jews, blue for Ukrainians, and red for Poles. The prisoner contingent was not stable. The camp saw a huge number of deportees from the ghettos and other detention places of Galicia. From December 41 till March 42, the number of Jewish prisoners increased by 6 times, from 500 to 3,000. And this number was constantly replenished by those detained during the roundups in Lviv and other towns of the region. As of May 42, according to a decree issued by the Higher Chief of SS and Police in the district of Galicia, Fritz Katzmann, the Janowska camp expanded to the surrounding areas and was built to accommodate 10,000 prisoners. It became an important asset in the hands of Fritz Katzmann, who commanded the operation of the extermination of Galician Jews during the Second World War. By the number of forced workers, the Janowska camp, along with Majdanek, is considered the largest forced labor camp in Eastern Europe. Forced labor was used here by the Nazis to emaciate the prisoners and lead them to a slow death. Most of the inmates were forced to work on the territory of DAW, which was Deutsche Ausrüstungswerke, a set of workshops operating for the German defense industry. Besides, their labor was used to develop camp infrastructure. They also worked at enterprises in Lviv and as part of sanitary brigades that cleaned the city. A working day usually started at 5 or 6 a.m. and lasted 12 to 14 hours. After that, inmates were often forced to do additional work, which in the camp jargon was called the vitamin work. In 1943, the Lviv DAO, with its 2,300 Jewish workers, was considered one of the most effective manufacturing facilities in the entire SS industrial empire, giving way only to Auschwitz and Majdanek. Starting from March 42, the Janowska camp also served as a transit point during the Nazi deportations of Galician Jews to the death camps of Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, as part of the Reinhardt operation, which envisaged the extermination of 1.7 million Jews in the general government. The operation started on the 17th of March, 42, with the first deportation from Lviv to Belzec, which arrived just after the first transport from the Lublin ghetto. We know that during the March action, a total of 15,000 Jews were deported to the Belzec gas chambers. Most of the Jews coming from other Galician cities and towns passed by the Janowska camp, where a prisoner selection would be carried out, similar to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Majdanek. The able-bodied prisoners would be kept at the camp for forced labor, while the incapacitated, namely sick, the elderly, women, and children, were sent from the nearby Kleparev railway station to the death camp or executed in Piski, which was the mass killing site on the territory of the camp. Deportations and selections were used by the camp administration to replenish the labor force at Janowska, and we know that such selections were also typical for other Nazi camps in the general government. In August 42, the Janowska camp played a central role during the mass deportations of Galician Jews, which coincided with the visit of Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler to Lviv on the 17th of August 42. Over 12 days, from the 10th till 22nd of August 42, the Germans rounded up about 40,000 Jews in the city of Lviv and deported them to Belzec. The August Action was the second largest deportation carried out in the general government after the resettlement of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto. Between 18th and 20th of November 42, the third operation, major deportation, was carried out in Lviv, involving around 10,000 people. After the liquidation of the Belzec death camp, starting from 43, transports from Lviv with Jews from Janowska were sent to Sobibor and Treblinka. The Janowska camp also functioned as a regional center for the collection of clothing and personal belongings of the victims from the entire Galicia region and Belzec. Two-storied buildings on the territory of the camp were used to store household items like baby carriages, bathtubs, suitcases, houseware, pots, cups, and others. The inmates were used to work in the laundry. They also washed and repaired the clothes and searched the pockets to hand over various valuables such as jewelry and watches. Over the entire period of its operation, a strict regime prevailed in the camp. Anyone suspected of sabotage, resistance, or escape attempts were publicly executed to intimidate other inmates. From autumn 42, the camp had been one of the largest centers of mass killings in the region, especially after the liquidation of the Belzec camp. As soon as on the 10th and 11th of December 42, several hundred Jews were executed in the Piski Valley upon being caught in the Lviv ghetto. In May 43, several thousand more Jews were killed here. And during the final liquidation of the Lviv ghetto in June 43, 7,000 Jews were brought to the camp, where they were also shot down later. And the last operation Action was carried out in November. It was the last mass execution of Jewish prisoners during an attempted escape and revolt in the camp. And this Action claimed the life of 4,000 to 5,000 persons. According to some accounts, the Janowska camp surpassed other Nazi concentration camps by the horrendous scale of brutality and torture exercised by the commandant and his entourage. The camp became a sort of a university of criminals, or a high school of sadism, as described by one inmate, Mikhail Maximilian Borovich. Many functionaries of the Nazi security apparatus were trained at the Janowska camp before they would be later involved in the bloodiest episodes of Nazi atrocities on the territory of Lviv and Galicia. The torture methods varied from shootings to hanging, freezing in barrels with water, strangling, beating to death, baiting with dogs, cutting body parts, also forcible suicides. Every SS officer at the camp had his favorite killing method. For those who were accused of committing criminal offenses against the Nazi regime, the camp became a pretrial detention center where interrogations were conducted by Nazi operatives, sentences were delivered and immediately executed. It is hard to establish the precise number of Janowska camp victims. In 1944, members of the Extraordinary Soviet Commission for the Investigation of Nazi Crimes assumed the total number of victims was over 200,000 persons. Current historians refer to lower numbers, from 35,000 to 80,000 victims. In any case, the Janowska camp is considered a center of Nazi violence and one of the Holocaust symbols in the region. The difficulty in establishing the real number of victims is also related to the Special Action 1005, Sonderaktion 1005, that was rolled out by the Nazis in the general government in order to cover the traces of their crimes. It was run by the SS Standartenführer Paul Wobel, an organizer of mass killings of Jews in occupied Ukraine, such as in Babin Yar, in Kiev. On the territory of Lviv, the action started in June 1943, when 129 Jewish prisoners from Janowska were selected to form a death brigade. They were promised to be kept alive, provided with new clothes, footwear, better nourishment, in exchange, even alcohol, in exchange for the extremely unpleasant work in uncovering the mass graves in the Piski Valley. They were made to exhume the bodies, burn them in huge fires, then the ashes would be spread around and the remaining bones would be crushed in the bone grinder, the one you can see on the picture. Besides, they also collected and handed in all the valuables found with the killed persons. The whole process, the whole operation was managed by the SS Untersturmführer Walter Schallock. We know that in total, the death brigade destroyed over 100,000 bodies of the victims of Nazi atrocities in Lviv. It also includes the Sinichi forest and other mass murder sites in Lviv. Despite all the efforts of the Nazi regime to cover the traces of their crimes, in 1944, members of the Soviet Commission examined the Piski Valley and discovered much evidence of mass executions. For example, they found over 50 pits filled with ashes, human fat, and fragments of bones and hair. Moreover, they exhumed mass burials on the territory of the camp and identified 400 human bodies murdered here in July 1944. As in many other large Nazi camps, the Janowska camp had its own orchestra, Lager Capella. It was organized in summer 1942 by SS Untersturmführer Richard Rokita, a former violin player at the jazz band in Katowice in pre-war Poland. The orchestra consisted of 30 to 40 inmates under the direction of the former Lviv opera conductor Jakub Mund and violin player Leopold Strix. They had to play every time prisoners were leaving for work under the guidance or order of Richard Rokita. They composed a special melody named Death Tango and performed it during executions. Eventually, all performers of the camp orchestra were killed alongside other Jewish prisoners. Possibly there was no single melody performed while any music played by the camp orchestra during mass executions was referred to as the Tango of Death. Here I will stop on describing the history of the camp itself, and will then switch to the topic, aspect of commemorations of this place in Ukraine. Here I have to admit that there was no place for the Holocaust in general and for the Janowska camp specifically in the Soviet historical narrative and post-war memory. The site has never been properly memorialized, and from the second half of the 40s, territory of the former camp was used by the Soviet penitentiary system to filter former forced laborers, inmates from Nazi concentration camps, and prisoners of war repatriated from Germany. From June 1947, the Soviet authorities located here workshops, established at transit prison number 25. Like their predecessors, the Soviets used the facilities of the former camp for forced labor. Only in the 60s and 70s, some writers and artists paid attention to the tragic history of the camp, such as the prose writer Taras Mihail, and later it was filmmaker Ihor Malashevsky, who in 1982 produced a documentary called 8 Bars of the Forgotten Music, featuring the tragic history of the Janowska camp orchestra. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was in 1993 when the Janowska Camp International Memorial Foundation, jointly with the Memorial Lviv Society, organized an international meeting and scientific conference dedicated to the 50th anniversary of the mass killings of the camp prisoners in November 43. And the result of this conference, a memorial stone was installed in the Pisky Valley to commemorate the victims. In 1994, the Lviv city authorities decided to build a monument on this place, which was never, unfortunately, implemented. Instead, in 2010, a competition was announced for projects of a memorial park entitled Janowska Concentration Camp, which was won by a group of architects from the US. However, the project has not been implemented yet. As of now, since December 1999, it has been the Lechakiv Correctional Institution number 30 that is located on the place of the former camp. Also, for almost 20 years, the police used this place as a dog training center, which was located in the Pisky Valley. The situation has changed significantly in 2018 when a special municipal program was launched in Lviv to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liquidation of the Lviv ghetto and the Janowska forced labor camp. This tragic anniversary brought together municipal institutions, international organizations, charity funds, the Jewish community, and the city authorities to commemorate the long suppressed history of the Janowska camp. Throughout 2018, the city saw over 30 events, including lectures, excursions, exhibition, conferences, memorial concerts, film screenings, and public discussions. One of the partners, implementing partners of these commemorations was the Memorial Museum of Territory of Terror, which jointly with the Center for Urban History of Central Europe organized a series of events, including an exhibition that was organized by the museum team, exhibition called the Janowska Forced Labor Camp, Industry of Terror, and a respective catalog was published only last year, dedicated to this story, and presented this year, at the beginning of this year. So this exhibition was part of the All City program, Lviv 43, city that did not survive. And it not only gave an opportunity to learn the primary sources, but also to use unique audio and video recordings of testimonies of former prisoners and their perpetrators found in the archives or documented in the course of the oral history project Nepochuti or Unheard. Last but not least, as part of the municipal program, the museum installed a memorial transport stop at Omolyan Cold Street, marked as Janowska concentration camp. The structure has a photograph of the camp orchestra and quotes from testimonies of camp prisoners that actualize the memory of the camp in the public space. Just to sum up my presentation, I would like to say that Zwangsarbeitslager Janowska or Lemberg Janowska was a hybrid camp. Despite the name, it was not only a forced labor detention facility and the forced labor camp, but also the site of mass killings and deportations to Nazi death camps. Prisoners were dying here in huge numbers of hard labor, starvation, infections, and torture. During the time of its operation, the camp performed several functions. It combined the features of forced labor camp, transit camp, and extermination camp. This hybridity of the camp was determined by its geographical location. According to the mechanism of the Holocaust, Galicia represented a frontier area between the Holocaust from bullets, which was more typical for the Reichskommissariat of Ukraine, and mass utilization and deportation of Jewish populations to the death camps. It was a conventional scheme for the extermination of Jews in occupied Europe. The post-Soviet memory, non-memory of the Janowska camp in Lviv is emblematic of the memory of the Holocaust in today's Ukraine, which is marked by the Soviet legacy of oblivion and the denial of the unique character of Nazi atrocities against Jews. The situation has started changing following the commemorations held on the 70th anniversary in 2018. Not without museum's contribution, this chapter of history in Lviv has become actualized. However, more efforts need to be done in order to properly memorialize one of the deadliest places in Ukraine during World War II. Thank you for your attention.